They found him sitting in the middle of the intersection, blocking traffic, refusing to move, and when the paramedic finally reached my car, she understood why. 5 years earlier, I'd pulled Teddy out of a kill shelter with less than a day to live. A dog so shut down they said he'd never bond, never be normal, never be anything but a liability. For years, we rebuilt each other quietly. Nothing dramatic, nothing heroic. Then one night, my car was T-boned at 50 miles an hour, and as consciousness faded, Teddy did something impossible. He escaped a locked apartment, crossed streets he'd never walked, and sat guard over my dying body until help arrived. No one, witnesses, first responders, even the doctors, could explain how he knew. The afternoon I walked into Riverside County Animal Services. The building smelled like industrial cleaners trying, and failing, to mask something older and more honest. Fear has a smell. So does resignation. It clung to the concrete floors, the rusted kennel latches, the damp fur pressed against chain link. I wasn't there to adopt. I was there because volunteer shifts at the shelter filled hours that would otherwise stretch dangerously empty. 6 months without work. 8 months since the divorce papers were signed. Somewhere in that span of time, I'd stopped recognizing my own reflection. Not because I looked different, but because the person staring back seemed like someone I used to know in another life. The kennels were arranged in 2 long rows, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, each cage marked with a card listing name, breed, intake date. Most dogs barked when you walked past. Desperate, hopeful sounds that clawed at your chest. But some didn't. Some had already learned that noise changes nothing. Teddy was in the 3rd kennel from the end. He wasn't barking. He wasn't pacing. He was sitting completely still, his nose pressed gently against the chain link, ears half raised in that uncertain way dogs have when they're listening for something they know won't come. His coat was a muted tan, not quite golden, not quite brown, the color of something that had once been bright but had faded under too much sun. What I remember most were his eyes. Not pleading, not angry, just tired. The volunteer walking with me, Sarah, her name badge red, stopped at his kennel and let out a slow breath. She didn't launch into the usual pitch about personality or potential. She just flipped through the pages on her clipboard, found his card, and said quietly, "This one's scheduled for tomorrow morning." I felt my chest tighten. Tomorrow. She nodded, her expression carefully neutral in the way people get when they've had to deliver bad news too many times. 9 a.m. He's been here 41 days. We're over capacity. I looked back at Teddy. He hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to our voices. His front paws rested on the raised metal grating of his kennel floor, the kind designed for drainage, cold and unforgiving against soft pads. What's his story? I heard myself ask. Sarah shrugged, but it wasn't dismissive. It was the shrug of someone who had learned to detach. Found tied behind an abandoned warehouse off Highway 60. No collar, no chip. Animal control held him the required 10 days. No one claimed him. She paused. He's difficult. Growls when cornered. Flinches if you move too fast. Not aggressive, she added quickly. Just shut down. Adoptions want happiness. He's not happy. Can I sit with him? She looked at me surprised. You can try, but he doesn't really engage. She unlocked the gate. The metallic scrape of the latch made Teddy's ears twitch, but he didn't move otherwise. I stepped inside, and she closed it behind me, then walked away to give us space. The kennel was maybe 6 feet by 8. Cold, echoey. I sat down on the floor, my back against the chain link on the opposite side from Teddy, and I didn't look at him. I'd learned, somewhere along the way, that sometimes the best thing you can offer someone is the absence of expectation. Minutes passed. The fluorescent lights hummed. A dog 2 kennels down whimpered softly. Somewhere farther off, a door slammed. Then I felt it, a subtle shift in weight. I glanced sideways. Teddy had moved closer. Not all the way, just close enough that his shoulder was barely touching my knee. He wasn't leaning into me for comfort. It was more like he was using me to keep his balance. That was the moment I understood. He wasn't just a dog someone had given up on. He was a living being standing on the same edge I'd been standing on for months. Breathing, existing, but not entirely convinced there was a reason to keep doing either. I didn't decide to save him because I had my life together. I didn't decide because I thought I could fix him. I decided because something in his brokenness recognized mine. And in that cold, fluorescent-lit shelter kennel, we made an unspoken deal. We'd stop disappearing. At least for now. At least together. I found Sarah at the front desk 40 minutes later and told her I wanted to start the adoption paperwork. She blinked, visibly surprised, then pulled out a stack of forms and a pen. "You sure?" she asked, not unkindly. I nodded. I wasn't sure about anything, but I was certain that if I walked out of that building and left Teddy behind, I'd be leaving part of myself there too. She slid the papers across the counter. "He may never be normal, you know?" I signed my name at the bottom. Neither am I. At that point in my life, I wasn't in a position to save anyone. I could barely get myself through the day. Listen, Teddy was told he'd never be normal, never matter, never make it, and look what he did. Right now, this channel is sitting at current count, and we're fighting to hit 1,000 subscribers. If a shelter dog on death row can save a life 5 years later, we can definitely hit a number on a screen. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop in the comments where you're watching from. Let's prove that broken things can build something beautiful. Teddy didn't give up. Neither are we. So twice a week, I showed up. I didn't know it yet, but that was the week everything started moving again. The mornings were the hardest. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. I'd wake up around 9, sometimes 10, stare at the ceiling for 20 minutes trying to remember if there was a reason to get up, then eventually shuffle to the kitchen because my body demanded coffee even if my mind didn't care. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt like punishment. No alarm clocks, no schedule, no voice calling from another room. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. I'd lost my job in March, a restructuring, they called it, which is corporate speak for, "We don't need you anymore." The severance lasted 3 months. The marriage ended shortly after. By August, I was living alone in a 1-bedroom I could barely afford, scrolling through job listings I wasn't qualified for. Watching my savings account shrink with the same detached fascination you'd feel watching a candle burn down. People kept asking if I was okay. I learned to say yes. I learned to smile at the right moments, to nod when they offered advice about networking or therapy or yoga. I learned that honesty made people uncomfortable, so I stopped being honest. The truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to be okay. Being okay requires effort. It required believing that the future held something worth moving toward. Most days I just felt paused, like I was standing on a platform waiting for a train that had already left. The volunteer position at Riverside County Animal Services wasn't something I'd planned. A former coworker mentioned they needed help. "Just a few hours a week," she said. "Walking dogs, cleaning kennels. It's something. That was all I had the capacity for. So twice a week I showed up. I wore old jeans and shoes I didn't care about. I followed instructions. I refilled water bowls and hosed down concrete and tried not to think too hard about what happened to the dogs who stayed too long. The staff was kind but tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bones. They moved through their shifts with mechanical efficiency, avoiding eye contact with the animals unless necessary. It wasn't cruelty. It was survival. You can't save them all, and breaking your heart every day doesn't help anyone. I understood that. I'd become good at not letting things touch me too deeply. But Teddy was different. I noticed him my second week there, though I didn't know his name yet. He was in the back row, the section they called long-term hold, which was a polite way of saying running out of time. Most dogs in that section barked constantly, hurling themselves against the gates, desperate for attention. Teddy didn't. He sat in the far corner of his kennel, perfectly still, staring at nothing. His coat was dull, patchy in places where stress had caused the fur to thin. His ribs were visible but not skeletal, just the lean, wary build of something that had learned not to expect regular meals. But it was his posture that got me. He wasn't cowering. He wasn't aggressive. He was just waiting, like he'd already accepted whatever came next. The first time I walked past his kennel, he didn't even look up. The second time, his eyes tracked me for half a second before returning to the wall. By the third time, I stopped in front of his gate. "Hey!" I said quietly. Nothing. Not even an ear twitch. I crouched down to his level. The metal floor of his kennel reflected the harsh overhead lights, making everything feel colder than it already was. He was sitting on a thin blanket, faded blue, frayed at the edges, the only soft thing in that entire space. "Are you doing okay in there?" It was a stupid question. Of course he wasn't okay. Neither was I. His eyes flicked toward me briefly, then away. Not afraid, not interested, just acknowledging my presence the way you'd acknowledge a fly buzzing nearby. I stayed there for a few minutes, then moved on. There were other dogs to feed, other tasks to complete, but something about him stuck with me. The next week, I asked Sarah about him. She was at the desk, typing something into the ancient desktop computer they used for records. She glanced up when I approached, reading my expression before I even spoke. "The tan mix in kennel 34? She guessed. I nodded. She sighed and pulled up his file. "Teddy. Came in mid-September. Found abandoned. No identification. We held him the required period. No claims. He's been available for adoption for 3 weeks. Any interest?" One couple looked at him. He growled when the guy reached for his collar too fast. She leaned back in her chair. It wasn't aggression, just fear. But it spooked them. They went with the lab puppy instead. "What happens if no one takes him?" Sarah's jaw tightened. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was flat, clinical. "We're over capacity. County policy says we can only hold for so long. He's scheduled for Thursday." "Thursday?" I repeated. 9 a.m. 2 days. I felt something twist in my chest. Not quite panic. Not quite grief. Just a dull, spreading ache. "Can I spend some time with him?" She studied me for a moment, then handed me a kennel key. "Go ahead. Just be careful. He's unpredictable." I walked back to kennel 34 and unlocked the gate. The metallic clang echoed through the row. Teddy's ears twitched, but he didn't move. I stepped inside and sat down on the floor, my back against the chain link. The concrete was cold through my jeans. The smell of disinfectant mixed with urine and fear. A smell you never quite get used to. Teddy stayed in his corner, watching me with those tired, unreadable eyes. I didn't try to touch him, didn't call him over, didn't make promises I couldn't keep. I just sat there, breathing the same stale air, existing in the same unbearable space. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, slowly, Teddy stood. He moved carefully, like his body hurt, and crossed the few feet between us. He didn't sit in my lap or lick my hand. He just leaned his shoulder against my knee. Barely any pressure, just enough to make contact. Not asking for comfort, just confirming I was real. I looked down at him. He looked up at me, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than emptiness. Not hope, not joy, just recognition. 2 broken things, sitting together in a cold concrete box, both running out of time. I reached out slowly and rested my hand on his back. He didn't pull away. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." I didn't know what I meant by that, but it felt like a decision. When I left the kennel 20 minutes later, I went straight to Sarah's desk. I want to adopt him. She looked up, startled. Are you sure? He's not easy. He might never. I'm sure. She pulled out the paperwork. The paperwork took 40 minutes. Sarah slid form after form across the desk: adoption agreement, medical history disclosure, behavioral assessment waiver, liability release. Each page required initials, signatures, dates. Each page was a reminder that what I was doing carried risk. He's currently on shots, Sarah said, checking boxes as she spoke. Neutered, negative for heartworm, but he hasn't been evaluated by a behaviorist. She looked up. We don't have the budget for that anymore. Okay. Which means we can't guarantee temperament. If he bites someone, legally, that's on you. I understand. She handed me another form. This one had a header in bold. Acknowledgement of high-risk adoption. I skimmed it. Words like unpredictable, reactive, potential danger jumped out. At the bottom, in smaller print, adopter assumes all liability for injury or property damage. I signed it. Sarah watched me, her expression unreadable. You live alone? Yeah. Any experience with traumatized animals? No. Support system? Someone who can help if things get difficult. I hesitated. My parents lived 3 states away. My sister had stopped returning my calls after the divorce. The friends I'd had through work had quietly faded once I stopped being someone they saw every day. I'll figure it out, I said. Sarah didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. She just stamped the final page and slid a leash across the counter. He's yours. Give me a few minutes to get him ready. I stood there holding the leash, feeling the weight of it in my hand. It was nylon, frayed at the edges, probably used on 100 dogs before this. It didn't feel like a symbol of hope. It felt like a rope tying me to something I wasn't sure I could carry. A voice behind me said, "You're adopting Teddy?" I turned. It was Marcus, one of the other volunteers, a college student who came in on weekends, always cheerful, always optimistic in that way people are when they haven't been worn down yet. Yeah. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's bold. Bold. I mean, good. It's good. He shifted his weight. It's just, he's kind of a project, you know? I tried working with him last week. Couldn't even get him to take a treat from my hand. I'm not trying to fix him, right? Yeah, of course. He nodded too quickly. Do you have a trainer lined up? Because I know someone who specializes in reactive dogs. I could get you their number. I'll think about it. And you've got a secure yard, right? Because if he bolts... Marcus. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I've got it. He raised his hands in surrender. Okay, cool. Just good luck. He walked away, and I was left standing there wondering if I just made the worst decision of my life. Sarah came back 10 minutes later with Teddy on a slip lead. He walked stiffly beside her, head low, eyes scanning the room like he was mapping exits. When he saw me, there was no recognition, no tail wag, nothing. Here. Sarah handed me the leash. His files in the bag, vet records, intake photos, everything we have. There's a blanket in there too. It's the one from his kennel. Might help with the transition. I took the bag. It was lighter than I expected. Good luck, she said quietly, and something in her tone made it clear she thought I'd need it. The parking lot was half empty. My car, a 12-year-old Honda with a dent in the rear bumper, sat under a tree at the far end. I led Teddy toward it, and he followed without resistance, but also without interest. Just mechanical compliance. When I opened the back door, he froze. It's okay, I said softly. Come on. He didn't move. I tried patting the seat. Tried coaxing. I tried waiting. Nothing. Finally, I lifted him. He went rigid in my arms, every muscle locked, but he didn't fight. I set him gently on the back seat, and he immediately pressed himself into the corner, as far from me as possible. I closed the door and got in the driver's seat. The engine started with a cough. I adjusted the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of Teddy in the back. He was panting, not from heat but from stress. His eyes were wide, locked on the window, body trembling. "We're just going home," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was reassuring him or myself. I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the main road. The drive took 20 minutes. Teddy didn't move the entire time, didn't look at me, didn't explore the car, just stayed frozen in that corner, breathing too fast, staring at nothing. Every few minutes, I glanced back at him. Each time, a voice in my head whispered the same question. What if I'm making this worse? What if the shelter, as horrible as it was, had at least been predictable? What if bringing him into my small, quiet apartment, into my messy, unstable life, was just another kind of cruelty? What if I couldn't do this? I gripped the steering wheel tighter and kept driving. When we got to my apartment, I parked in the narrow carport and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt oppressive. "Okay," I said. "We're here." Teddy didn't react. I got out, opened the back door, and clipped the leash onto his collar. He stepped out slowly, legs stiff, and stood on the asphalt like he wasn't sure it would hold him. I led him up the concrete stairs to the second floor. My apartment was at the end of the breezeway, number 2F, paint peeling around the doorframe, a faded welcome mat I'd inherited from the previous tenant. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Teddy stopped at the threshold. "Come on," I said gently. He stared into the apartment. At the worn couch, the cluttered coffee table, the dishes I hadn't washed yet sitting in the sink. His ears were pinned back. His body language screamed, "I don't want to go in there." But he did, because he had no choice. He stepped inside, and I closed the door behind us. For the first hour, Teddy didn't move from the entryway. He just stood there, pressed against the door, head lowered, breathing shallow and fast. I sat on the floor a few feet away, trying to give him space, trying to look non-threatening, trying not to feel like a failure. "You're safe here," I said quietly. "I know you don't believe that yet, but you are." He didn't look at me. I thought about all the adoption stories I'd seen online. The ones where the dog immediately curls up on the couch, or plays with a toy, or gazes up at their new owner with adoring eyes. The ones with happy endings baked in from the start. This wasn't that. This was a traumatized animal standing in a stranger's apartment, too scared to move, too exhausted to run. And I was a broken woman who just tied her fragile stability to his. There was no triumph here, no moment of heroism, just two lives bound together by desperation, trying to figure out how to exist in the same space without falling apart. I pulled the blanket from his kennel out of the bag and spread it on the floor near the couch. Teddy's eyes tracked the movement, but he didn't approach. "Whenever you're ready," I said. Then I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink. By the time the sun set, Teddy had moved exactly 3 feet, from the door to the corner near the bookshelf. He lay down there, still tense, still watching. I turned off the lights and went to bed. Neither of us slept. The first week, Teddy ate only when I left the room. I'd fill his bowl with kibble, set it on the kitchen floor, and walk away. Then I'd sit on the couch pretending to read while listening for the sound of him moving. Sometimes it took 10 minutes, sometimes an hour, but eventually, I'd hear the quiet click of nails on linoleum, the soft crunch of food being eaten quickly, mechanically. Not with enjoyment, but with the grim efficiency of something fueling itself to survive. By the time I'd turn around, he'd be back in his corner. The apartment became a space we shared but didn't inhabit together. Teddy claimed the area near the bookshelf, far enough from the door to feel hidden, close enough to escape if needed. He'd lie there for hours, head up, eyes tracking my every movement. Not with curiosity, with surveillance. I tried to give him room. I tried not to hover. But it's strange, living with another being who treats your presence like a threat. The second week, I learned his triggers. The smoke detector battered low one morning, a single sharp beep. Teddy bolted so fast he slammed into the coffee table, scrambled backward, and wedged himself between the couch and the wall, panting like he'd run miles. I froze, holding my coffee mug midair. "Teddy," I said softly, "it's okay. It's just another beep." He flinched violently, pressing himself flatter against the wall. I set down my mug, grabbed a chair, and changed the battery as quickly as possible. When I stepped down, Teddy was still wedged in that gap, trembling. I sat on the floor several feet away. "It's gone. Promise. It won't beep again." He didn't move for 2 hours. After that, I started cataloging the things that scared him. Sudden movements. If I stood up too quickly, he'd flinch. Raised voices. Even my own, even when I wasn't angry, just talking on the phone. Doors closing. He'd startle every time. Ears pinned back, body coiled. Men's voices from the TV. He'd leave the room entirely. Anyone approaching him directly. If I walked toward him, he'd retreat. Living with Teddy was like sharing space with a shadow that had learned to expect pain. By the third week, I'd built my entire routine around him. I woke up at 7 every morning, not because I wanted to, but because he needed structure. Dogs thrive on routine, the internet said. So I gave him one, even though I barely had one for myself. 7 a.m. Wake up. Move slowly. Don't make eye contact. 7:15. Fill his food and water bowls. Leave the room. 7:30. Take him outside. That last part was the hardest. Teddy didn't understand walks yet, or maybe he understood them too well in the wrong way. The leash made him shut down completely. The moment I clipped it to his collar, he'd go rigid, legs locked, head low. I'd have to half guide, half coax him down the stairs and into the small patch of grass behind the building. He'd stand there, frozen, until his body's needs overrode his fear. Then he'd relieve himself quickly and pull toward the stairs, desperate to get back inside. It wasn't a walk. It was a hostage negotiation. But I kept doing it. Every morning, every evening. Because if I didn't, the guilt would crush me. The apartment stopped feeling like mine. I rearranged furniture to give him more space. Moved the coffee table so he had a clear path between his corner and the door. Stopped using the vacuum because the sound sent him into a panic. Started keeping the TV volume low, the lights dim. I tiptoed through my own home. At night, Teddy paced. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft click of his nails on the hardwood as he circled the living room. Around and around, hour after hour, like he was patrolling, like he couldn't let himself rest. Some nights, I'd get up and sit on the couch, just to let him know I was there. He'd pause, watch me for a moment, then resume his route. Never coming closer, never stopping. I started sleeping worse than I had before he arrived. And yet, somehow I didn't regret it. It wasn't that things got better. It was that they got different. By the fourth week, the silence between us felt less hostile. Still heavy, but not quite as suffocating. Teddy stopped flinching every time I entered a room. He still watched me constantly, but the tension in his body had lessened just slightly. Enough that I noticed. One morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, scrolling through job listings I had no energy to apply for, when I felt something shift in the air. I glanced up. Teddy had moved from his corner to the edge of the living room. He was lying down, head resting on his paws, staring at me. Not with fear, not with suspicion, just watching. I didn't say anything, didn't move, just held his gaze for a moment before returning to my screen. When I looked up again 20 minutes later, he was still there. It wasn't much, but it was something. the loneliness started to feel less sharp. Not because Teddy filled the silence with joy or companionship. He didn't. He was still a ghost in my apartment, still more absent than presence. But his existence demanded things from me. Small things, necessary things. I had to wake up at a certain time. I had to leave the apartment twice a day, even when I didn't want to. I had to buy food that wasn't just for me. I had to think about something other than my own slow unraveling. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even comfortable. But it was structured. And structure, I was learning, could be a kind of lifeline. The turning point came on a Sunday. I'd been living with Teddy for 5 weeks. It was raining. One of those cold, relentless November rains that turns the world gray and makes you want to stay in bed forever. I was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. One of those days where the weight in my chest felt too heavy to move, where getting up to make coffee seemed impossible, where I understood with perfect clarity why Teddy had looked so tired in that shelter kennel. I wasn't crying. I was just empty. I don't know how long I sat there. An hour, maybe more. Then I felt it. Presence. Close. I looked down. Teddy was sitting next to the couch. Not touching it. Not touching me. Just sitting there, a foot away, staring at me with those dark, unreadable eyes. My breath caught. "Hey!" I whispered. He didn't move. I slowly extended my hand, not reaching for him, just letting it rest on the edge of the cushion. An offering, not a demand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Teddy stood, took 2 hesitant steps forward, and rested his chin on the couch, right next to my hand. I froze, didn't breathe, didn't blink. He stayed there, just his chin on the cushion, eyes half closed, body still tense but present. I moved my hand slowly, carefully, and rested it on the top of his head. He didn't pull away. I felt the warmth of him, the solidity, the proof that he was real, that I was real, that we were both still here despite everything. "It's okay," I whispered. "We're okay." I didn't believe it. Not entirely. But saying it out loud made it feel possible. We stayed like that for a long time. Me on the couch, hand on his head. Him standing beside me, allowing it. When he finally pulled away and returned to his corner, something had shifted. Not fixed. Not healed. But shifted. After that, Teddy started choosing proximity. Not often. Not predictably. But sometimes, when I was reading on the couch, he'd lie down nearby. Still several feet away, but in the same room. Close enough that I could hear him breathing. Sometimes, when I was cooking dinner, he'd wander into the kitchen and sit by the table. Not begging for food, just existing in the same space. Sometimes, late at night when he paced, I'd sit on the floor in the hallway, and he'd pause his route to sit a few feet away. We'd stay there in the darkness, 2 insomniacs keeping vigil together. He still didn't wag his tail, didn't play, didn't greet me when I came home, but he stopped treating me like a stranger, and I stopped feeling like I was living alone. By the end of the 2nd month, I realized something strange. I was still depressed, still unemployed, still rebuilding a life that had collapsed. The apartment was still too quiet, the future still uncertain, the weight in my chest still present. But I was getting up every morning. I was leaving the house. I was responsible for something other than myself. Teddy hadn't saved me. He wasn't some magical cure for everything that was broken. But he'd given me a reason to keep moving. And sometimes that's enough. One night, as I lay in bed listening to him pace the living room, I called out softly, "Teddy, come here." The pacing stopped. I waited, not expecting anything. Then I heard it, the soft click of nails on hardwood growing closer. My bedroom door was open. Teddy appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light from the living room. He stood there for a moment, hesitant. Then he crossed the threshold, walked to the side of my bed, and lay down on the floor. Not on the bed. Not touching me. Just close. I reached my hand down over the edge of the mattress. He sniffed it once, then rested his head near it. "Good night, Teddy," I whispered. He sighed. A long, heavy exhale that sounded like relief. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. And so did he. Quick pause, because just like Teddy learned trust one small moment at a time, this channel is growing one subscriber at a time. We're on a mission to 1,000, and honestly, if you've made it this far into the story, you're already part of it. So do me a favor. Hit like if this is hitting you in the feelings. Subscribe if you believe stories like this deserve to be told. And comment where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to remember that healing isn't loud. It's quiet, persistent, and worth it. Let's grow this thing together. The first time Teddy's tail moved, I almost missed it. It was early December, 3 months after I'd brought him home. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I dropped a spoon. It clattered against the tile floor, a sharp, metallic sound that would have sent him scrambling weeks earlier. But he didn't run. He was lying near the doorway, and when I bent down to pick up the spoon, I saw it. The slightest movement at the tip of his tail. Not a wag, just a small lift and fall, like a question mark briefly uncurling. I froze, spoon in hand, staring at him. He was watching me, and for the first time since I'd met him, his eyes didn't look wary. They looked curious. I smiled. Actually smiled. "Did you just?" His tail did it again. One tiny thump against the floor. My chest tightened in a way that wasn't painful. I set the spoon in the sink and crouched down to his level, still several feet away. "That's new," I said softly. He held my gaze, and I swear something passed between us. An acknowledgement. A beginning. It wasn't much, but it was everything. After that, I started noticing the patterns. Teddy had been observing me for months, cataloging my routines, learning the architecture of my life. Now he is beginning to participate in it. He learned the sound of my keys. Before, when I'd pick them up from the counter, he'd watch with detached interest, as if my comings and goings had nothing to do with him. But now, when I grabbed them, he'd stand up. Not excited, that would come later, but alert. "Ready. You want to go out?" I'd ask. His ears would perk forward. It became our ritual. Keys meant movement. Movement meant the world beyond the apartment. And slowly, the world beyond the apartment started to mean something other than fear. He learned my shoes. I had 2 pairs I rotated. Sneakers for errands, boots for walks. If I put on the sneakers, Teddy would watch me leave and settle back into his spot. But if I reached for the boots, he'd stand and move toward the door. He knew. One morning I tested it. Put on the boots but didn't grab the leash. Just stood there. Teddy walked to the door and sat, facing it, waiting. I laughed. A real startled laugh that burst out before I could stop it. "You're too smart for your own good," I told him. He glanced back at me, and I could have sworn he looked smug. That's when I realized I'd laughed. I hadn't laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly, in months, maybe longer. Felt strange, unfamiliar, but good. He learned my voice, not just the words, but the tones. If I spoke gently, he'd relax. If I was stressed, talking too fast on the phone, muttering at my laptop, he'd come sit near me. Not for comfort, just to be present. One afternoon, I got a rejection email from a job I'd actually wanted. The kind of rejection that's polite and professional and somehow makes it worse because there's no one to be angry at. I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar hollowness spread through my chest. Then I felt warmth against my leg. Teddy had pressed his side against my calf. Not leaning heavily, just there. I looked down at him. "Bad day," I said. His tail thumped once. I slid off the chair and sat on the floor beside him. He didn't move away, didn't move closer, just stayed. We sat like that for 10 minutes. Maybe more. When I finally stood up to close my laptop, the hollowness felt smaller. The snow came in mid-December. I woke up to a world transformed, white and silent. Everything softened under a thick blanket. The apartment complex looked almost pretty, the chain-link fence and cracked asphalt hidden beneath powder. Teddy stood at the window, transfixed. "You've never seen snow before, have you?" I said. His ears swiveled toward my voice, but his eyes stayed locked on the window. I grabbed his leash. "Come on, let's go check it out." Outside, the cold hit immediately, sharp and clean. Teddy stepped onto the landing and stopped. His paw sank into 2 inches of snow. He lifted it, stared at it, then put it down again. Then he did something I'd never seen him do. He bounced. Not a full jump, just a small, stiff-legged bounce, like he wasn't sure his body remembered how to play but was willing to try. Then he did it again, and again, hopping through the snow, nose down, kicking up powder, utterly baffled and completely absorbed. I stood there, leash slack in my hand, watching him, and I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, a full, breathless laugh that echoed in the quiet morning. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and genuine, the kind you can't fake. Teddy paused and looked back at me, snow dusting his nose, ears perked in confusion. "You're ridiculous," I told him. His tail wagged. A real wag, 3 full sweeps side to side. I laughed harder. For 5 minutes, we stayed in that parking lot while Teddy investigated every inch of snow within leash range. And I stood there grinning like an idiot, my breath fogging in the cold air. When we finally went back inside, my cheeks hurt from smiling. I couldn't remember the last time that had happened. Somewhere in the mess of those small moments, the weight of responsibility shifted. Before, taking care of Teddy had felt like another item on an impossible list. Another thing I had to do when I could barely take care of myself. But now, waking up to feed him didn't feel like a burden. Felt like an anchor, a reason to get out of bed that had nothing to do with productivity or self-improvement or any of the things well-meaning people kept telling me I needed. Teddy needed me, and that simple fact gave my days shape. The walks weren't obligations anymore. They were intervals of fresh air, of movement, of stepping outside the 4 walls that sometimes felt like a trap. The routine wasn't restrictive. It was grounding. And slowly, so slowly I didn't notice until it had already happened, I started needing him too. Not in a desperate way. Not in the way you need something to save you. But in this way you need a rhythm, pattern, a heartbeat that isn't your own, reminding you that life is still happening. One evening, I was on the couch reading when Teddy walked over and dropped a sock at my feet. I stared at it. Are you trying to play?" He looked at the sock. "Look at me." His tail wagged hesitantly. I picked up the sock. "You want this?" I tossed it gently across the room. Teddy watched it arc through the air, land on the carpet, and lie there. Then he looked back at me like I just performed magic. He trotted over, picked it up, and brought it back. Not all the way to me, just halfway. Then he dropped it and waited. "Okay," I said, standing up. "We're doing this." I picked up the sock and threw it again. He retrieved it, dropped it closer this time. We did this 5 times. 6, 7. By the 8th throw, Teddy dropped the sock directly at my feet, tail wagging steadily, eyes bright. I crouched down and scratched behind his ears. He leaned into it. "Look at you," I whispered. "Look at us." He licked my hand once, quick, uncertain, and then pulled back, as if testing whether that was allowed. I laughed softly. It's allowed. All of it. That night, Teddy slept on the floor next to my bed, close enough that I could hear him breathing, steady and sure. The sound of something no longer just surviving. The sound of something learning to live. Time has a way of moving differently when you're no longer just waiting for it to pass. The first year with Teddy was measured in small victories. The second year, those victories became routines. By the third year, I stopped counting. We grew older together. Quietly, beautifully. Teddy's muzzle turned gray first. A soft silvering around his nose that spread gradually to his eyebrows, then his chest. His pace on walks slowed from cautious to leisurely. The muscles in his shoulders, once tense and coiled, softened into something more relaxed. He filled out too. The gauntness that had defined him in the shelter gave way to a healthy weight. His ribs no longer visible, his coat thicker and shinier. He looked like a different dog. But more than that, he was different. The fear never fully disappeared. Sudden loud noises still made him flinch. Certain situations still triggered that ancient wariness. But he'd learned to recover. A door slamming would make him startle, but instead of bolting, he'd look at me. If I was calm, he'd settle. He'd learned that the world could be unpredictable without being dangerous. That not all surprises ended in pain. My own changes were less visible but just as real. I got a job in the second year, nothing glamorous, just administrative work at a nonprofit downtown. The pay was modest, the work mundane, but it was stable. It was something. My apartment stayed the same, but I made it more intentionally mine. Hung pictures. Bought a plant that somehow didn't die. Replaced the sagging couch with one from a thrift store that didn't smell like someone else's life. I started running again. Not obsessively, just a few miles a couple times a week, usually with Teddy trotting beside me. He'd never be a distance dog, but he seemed to enjoy the rhythm of it, the purposeful movement, the shared focus. I even dated briefly. Nothing serious. A few awkward dinners, some pleasant conversations that went nowhere. It didn't hurt the way I'd expected it to. I wasn't ready for anything significant, and that felt okay. I was rebuilding. Slowly, imperfectly, but rebuilding. The dark days still came. Some mornings, I'd wake up with that old weight pressing down on my chest. The kind that makes breathing feel like work, that makes the simplest tasks feel insurmountable. But now, when that happened, I wasn't alone. Teddy always knew before I did. I'd be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself to get up, and I'd feel the mattress shift. He'd jumped up sometime in the night, something he only did on the bad days, and positioned himself across my legs. Not aggressively, not demandingly, just a present. Heavy. Real. I know, I'd whisper. I'm trying. He'd rest his chin on my knee and wait. And somehow that weight, his physical presence, made the other weight more bearable. Because I couldn't stay in bed all day. He needed to go out. I needed breakfast. Needed me to be functional even when I didn't want to be. So I'd get up. Some days that was all I managed. Getting up, feeding him, taking him outside, then crawling back into survival mode for the rest of the day. But even that was more than I would have done alone. Teddy developed an uncanny sense for my emotional state. On good days, he was independent, content to nap in his favorite spot by the window, following me from room to room but not hovering. On unstable days, he shadowed me. If I sat, he sat nearby. If I moved, he moved. Not anxiously but attentively, like he was keeping watch. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, scrolling through news that was making my chest tight. Another story about something awful, another reminder of how fragile everything was. I felt my breathing getting shallow, felt that familiar spiral starting, the one where every thought feeds into the next until you're drowning in worst-case scenarios. Then Teddy was there. He pushed his head under my hand, forcing my palm to rest on top of his skull. I blinked, pulled back into the present. "Hey!" I said softly. He stared at me, not with pity, just with presence. I closed the laptop, took a breath, then another. "You're right," I told him. "That's enough for tonight." He led me to the couch. I sat down, and he settled beside me, close enough that our bodies touched. We stayed like that until the tightness in my chest eased. He didn't fix it, but he interrupted it. And sometimes, interruption is enough. By the 5th year, our life together had a rhythm that felt almost normal. Weekday mornings. Alarm at 6:30, quick walk, breakfast for both of us. Then I'd leave for work while Teddy settled in for the day. Evenings, longer walk, dinner, couch time. Sometimes I read. Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence. Weekends, errands, hikes if the weather was good. Lazy afternoons where time didn't matter. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself 10 years earlier. But it was stable. And after everything, stability felt like a gift. Teddy slowed down in ways I tried not to think about too much. His hearing wasn't as sharp. I call his name, and he wouldn't respond until I was closer, louder. His joints stiffened on cold mornings. He'd take longer to stand, move more carefully on stairs. I started keeping a bottle of glucosamine supplements on the counter, hiding the pills in peanut butter. He still played, but in shorter bursts. Still greeted me at the door, but with less exuberance, more dignity. He was aging. So was I, though less visibly. We'd both earned our gray hairs. One Saturday afternoon, I was cleaning out a closet and found the folder from the shelter. The intake paperwork, the liability waivers, the photo they'd taken of Teddy on his first day there. I sat on the floor and stared at that picture. He looked so small in it, so defeated. Eyes dull, ears flat, body language screaming resignation. I glanced across the room. Teddy was sprawled in a patch of sunlight by the window, snoring softly, one ear flopped inside out. The contrast was staggering. "We did okay," I said aloud. His ear twitched, but he didn't wake. I tucked the photo back into the folder and put it away. Not because I wanted to forget, but because we didn't need it anymore. We weren't those versions of ourselves. Not the woman who'd barely been surviving. Not the dog who'd given up. We were something else now. Something neither of us could have become alone. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, Teddy followed me into the bathroom. He sat in the doorway while I brushed my teeth, watching me with that steady, familiar gaze. "What?" I said through a mouthful of toothpaste. His tail wagged once. I rinsed, dried my face, and crouched down to scratch behind his ears. 5 years, I said quietly. "Can you believe it?" He leaned into my hand, eyes half closed. "I couldn't have made it without you. You know that, right?" He licked my wrist, quick and gentle. I wrapped my arms around him, careful not to squeeze too tight, and pressed my forehead against his. "Thank you," I whispered. He sighed, content and heavy in my arms. We stayed like that for a while. 2 survivors. 2 lives that had found each other when they needed it most. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel before. Gratitude, not for what could have been, not for some imagined better life, but for this, for him, for the quiet, steady, imperfect reality we'd built together. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was a Wednesday. I remember that specifically because Wednesdays were always the longest, the middle of the week, when the momentum from Monday has died and Friday still feels impossibly far away. I'd stayed late at the office finishing a grant report that was due the next morning, the kind of tedious task that requires just enough focus to be draining but not enough to be engaging. By the time I logged off, it was almost 8 p.m. The office was empty. The hallway lights had switched to their motion-activated nighttime mode, flickering on in sections as I walked toward the elevator. Outside, the parking lot was nearly deserted. Just my Honda and 2 other cars under the harsh glow of the streetlights. The air was cold and damp. Not quite raining, but threatening to. That particular January cold that seeps through your jacket and settles in your bones. I unlocked the car, tossed my bag onto the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel for a moment, letting the engine warm up. My phone showed 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. Probably spam. I deleted the notifications. A text from my neighbor. Teddy was barking around 6. Is everything okay? I frowned. Teddy rarely barked. I typed back, weird. I'll check on him when I get home. Thanks. I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the main road. The drive home usually took 25 minutes. Longer if traffic was bad. But at this hour, the streets were mostly empty. Just the occasional car passing in the opposite direction. Headlights cutting through the mist. I was tired. The kind of tiredness that lives behind your eyes, that makes concentrating feel like wading through fog. I'd skipped lunch, forgotten to eat the granola bar I'd brought, survived on coffee and distraction. The radio was on low. Some talk show I wasn't really listening to, just ambient noise to fill the silence. I thought about Teddy waiting at home, about how he'd be sitting by the door when I came in, tail wagging in that slow, dignified way he'd developed, about how I'd feed him late and feel guilty about it, even though he'd forgive me instantly. I thought about leftover pasta in the fridge, about whether I had the energy to reheat it or would just eat it cold. Normal thoughts, mundane thoughts, the kind you have when you think you know how the night will end. The intersection at Highland and 7th was controlled by a traffic light that always seemed to catch me. I slowed as it turned yellow, preparing to stop. Car approached from my left. I registered it peripherally, headlights moving fast, but the light was red for them. I had the right of way. I pressed the gas pedal, entering the intersection. For a split second, everything was normal. Then the world exploded into noise and light and violent, incomprehensible motion. I don't remember the impact itself. Memory has a strange way of protecting you from the worst moments, editing them out, leaving only the before and after. What I remember: headlights, impossibly bright, filling my peripheral vision. The animal instinctively jerked the wheel, though there was no time, no room, nowhere to go. The sound: metal screaming, glass shattering, something deep and primal that didn't sound like it belonged in the real world. Then nothing. Not blackness, not unconsciousness, just absence. A gap in the narrative where time should have been. When awareness returned, it came in fragments. Cold. I was cold. Something wet on my face. Rain? Blood? Couldn't tell. My chest hurts. Not sharp pain. More like pressure, like something heavy was sitting on my sternum. I tried to move and immediately regretted it. Pain radiated down my left side, bright and insistent. My vision was wrong, blurred. I blinked, trying to clear it, and slowly the world assembled itself into recognizable shapes. Dashboard. Crumpled. The airbag deflated against the steering wheel. Windshield. Shattered into a spiderweb pattern, held together by some miracle of engineering, but no longer transparent. The passenger seat. Empty. My bag on the floor spilled. I turned my head, too fast, pain shooting down my neck, and looked out the driver's side window. My car was stopped at an angle in the middle of the intersection. Another car, a dark SUV, sat perpendicular to mine, its front end caved in, steam rising from under the hood. Red and blue lights flashing somewhere. Sirens. Distant. Getting closer. I tried to open my door. It wouldn't budge. My hands were shaking. I couldn't feel my left leg. That seemed important, but I couldn't figure out why. A face appeared at my window. A woman, middle-aged, eyes wide with panic. "Don't move!" she shouted through the glass. "Help is coming. Just stay still." I tried to speak. My voice came out wrong. Weak. "I'm okay." I wasn't sure if that was true. The woman disappeared, replaced by another face. A man this time, phone pressed to his ear. More sirens. Closer now. I closed my eyes. Time did that strange thing again, expanding and contracting simultaneously. Seconds that felt like minutes. Minutes that vanished entirely. Someone was prying open my door. Hands on my shoulders, my arms. A voice telling me not to move, that they had me, that I was safe. I tried to say I needed to call someone. I needed to tell them I'd be late. Needed to feed Teddy. But the words wouldn't come out right. Someone put a brace around my neck. Slide a board under me. Everything hurts. The sky above me was dark and starless. Just the dull orange glow of city lights reflected in low clouds. I was lifted, moved, the world tilted. Then I was inside an ambulance. Bright lights, the smell of antiseptic, a paramedic hovering over me, asking questions I couldn't quite process. "Can you tell me your name?" I told her. "Do you know what happened?" "Accident," I managed. "Do you have any allergies? Are you on any medications?" I shook my head, or tried to. The neck brace made it impossible. She was doing something to my arm. And I felt the cold rush of fluid. "You're going to be okay," she said. "We're taking you to the county general. Just stay with me. All right?" I nodded, but my mind was somewhere else. Teddy. Alone. Waiting. "My dog," I said. "I need to." "We'll make sure someone contacts your family," the paramedic said. "No. My dog. He's home. Alone. He needs. We'll handle it. Right now, I need you to focus on staying calm." I wanted to argue. Wanted to explain that Teddy would be confused, worried, that he wouldn't understand why I wasn't coming home. But exhaustion pulled at me, heavy and irresistible. The ambulance swayed. Sirens wailed. And somewhere in the back of my fading consciousness, I thought, this is it. This is the test. Everything we'd built. Everything we'd survived. All of it hung in the balance. And I couldn't do anything but hope it was enough. "Okay, real talk." Teddy broke through a locked gate, ran 3 blocks in the dark, and refused to let the person he loved die alone. "The least we can do is hit a subscribe button, right? We're clawing our way to 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you is proof that people still care about real stories. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment your location so we can see how far Teddy's story is reaching, and share this with someone who needs it. If a dog hours from being put down can save a life, we can build a community that matters." I didn't learn what happened until 3 days later. By then, I was stable, relatively. Left leg fractured in 2 places, 3 broken ribs, severe bruising, mild concussion, significant blood loss. The doctors used words like lucky and could have been worse, which are the things people say when you've survived something that should have killed you. I was in and out of consciousness those first days. Pain medication kept the world soft and distant. Faces appeared and disappeared. Nurses, doctors, a police officer asking questions I couldn't quite answer. But no Teddy. Every time I surfaced into awareness, that was my first thought. Where's Teddy? On the 3rd day, when my head had cleared enough to hold a conversation, a nurse I hadn't seen before came in to check my vitals. "Your neighbor brought some things for you," she said, nodding toward a small bag on the chair. "She also wanted me to tell you your dog is fine. She's been checking on him." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you." The nurse finished with the blood pressure cuff and made a note on her chart. Then she paused, looking at me with an odd expression. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Your dog, Teddy, right? Big tan mix." I nodded. "How did he get out that night?" I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "The night of your accident. He got out somehow. The paramedics mentioned it in their report." She tilted her head. "I'm just curious how he managed it." My heart started beating faster. "I don't understand. He was home. He should have been inside." "He was at the scene," she said gently. "At the crash. That's how they found you so quickly." She left to get the paramedic who'd brought me in. A woman named Lisa, early 40s, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She came in during her break, still in uniform, holding a cup of terrible hospital coffee. "You wanted to know about the dog?" she said. "Please." She pulled up a chair and sat down. "I've been doing this job for 16 years. I've seen a lot of strange things. But that night," she shook her head, "that was different." "Tell me." Lisa took a sip of coffee, organizing her thoughts. "We got the call at 8:17 p.m. Motor vehicle accident, Highland and 7th. When we arrived on scene, there was already a crowd, a couple of witnesses, some people from nearby businesses. But the first thing I noticed was the dog. Teddy, big tan dog, sitting right next to your car. Wouldn't let anyone near you." I felt my chest tighten. "He was aggressive?" "No, not aggressive. Just protective. When people tried to approach your door, he'd position himself between them and the vehicle. Didn't growl, didn't bark. Just blocked. One guy tried to push past him, and the dog planted his feet and wouldn't budge." She paused. "It was like he was guarding you. How did he even get there?" "That's what I wanted to know." I asked around. "Turns out your neighbor, Mrs. Chun, elderly woman, lives in the unit next to yours. She's the one who called 911. "She called about the accident?" "No, she called about the dog." Lisa explained what she'd pieced together from witness statements. Mrs. Chun had been in her kitchen around 7:45 p.m. when she heard barking. Loud, insistent barking coming from my apartment. She texted me, got no response, and went back to her dinner. But the barking didn't stop. It got worse, more urgent. Then it changed. Turned into something she described as howling. Not the normal sound of a dog left alone, but something desperate, primal. She went to check on my apartment. Knocked. No answer. The barking was coming from inside. Frantic now. She tried the door, locked. Looked through the window, couldn't see anything. Then she heard a crash. The back gate, the one that led from my apartment's tiny patio to the alley behind the building, had a latch that stuck. You had to jiggle it just right to get it open. I'd been meaning to fix it for months but never got around to it. Teddy had forced it open. Mrs. Chun saw him in the alley, pacing, agitated. She called out to him, but he took off running. That's when she called 911. Not for an accident she didn't know about, but for a loose dog acting strange. "She gave them your address, said she was worried something was wrong," Lisa continued. "Dispatch logged it as a welfare check, low priority. But then, about 20 minutes later, we started getting calls about a dog in the middle of Highland and 7th. Blocking traffic. Refusing to move. Multiple witnesses saw the same thing. A man driving home from his shift at the hospital almost hit Teddy. The dog was sitting in the center of the intersection, right next to the wreckage. The man slammed on his brakes, honked, and tried to scare him away. Teddy didn't move. A woman stopped her car and got out, trying to coax him to safety. Teddy stayed put. Someone called animal control. Someone else called the police. By the time emergency services arrived, there was a crowd. And in the middle of it all, Teddy sat beside my car, refusing to leave. "When I got there," Lisa said, "he looked at me, direct eye contact, and I swear to God, it felt like he was saying, 'She's in there. Help her.'" "He let you approach?" "Not at first. I had to talk to him, kneel down, show him my hands, explain what I was doing." She laughed softly. "I know that sounds crazy, but it worked. Once he understood I was there to help, he backed off. Just enough to let us work. But he never left. Even when we loaded you into the ambulance, he tried to jump in." "What stopped him?" "One of the officers held his collar. The dog fought it, not violently but desperately. Like he needed to stay with you." She met my eyes. A couple of witnesses were crying. I'm not ashamed to say I was one of them. Lisa finished her coffee and stood. "Your neighbor took him home that night, But here's the thing I keep trying to figure out. She paused. How did he know? What do you mean? You were 3 blocks from your apartment. It was dark. Raining. There's no way he could have seen the accident from your place. No way he could have heard it. She shook her head. But somehow he knew exactly where to go. Ran straight there. Sat down and refused to leave until help came. Maybe he followed the sound of sirens? Sirens came after. We checked the timeline. He was there before anyone called it in. Before witnesses even started gathering. She looked at me. That dog knew you were in trouble before anyone else did. And he did whatever it took to make sure you got help. After she left, I lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. Teddy had been hours from being euthanized when I met him. Labeled difficult. Shut down. Not suitable for adoption. They'd said he might never be normal. They were right. He wasn't normal. He was extraordinary. 5 years ago, I'd walked into that shelter and pulled him back from the edge of death because something in his brokenness recognized mine. And 3 nights ago, when I was the one running out of time, he'd returned the favor. Not as a pet, as a family. They brought Teddy to see me on the 5th day. The hospital had strict policies about animals. Service dogs only, no exceptions. But my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, had apparently campaigned on my behalf with the kind of persistence only elderly women who've survived revolutions can muster. She'd spoken to nurses, supervisors, anyone who would listen. That dog saved her life, she'd told them. She needs to see him. Eventually, they relented. 1 visit. 30 minutes. Supervised. A nurse came in that morning to warn me. Your neighbor is bringing your dog at 2 p.m. We're bending the rules here, so he needs to stay calm. If he causes any disruption, he won't, I said. She looked skeptical but nodded. The hours between that conversation and 2 p.m. stretched impossibly long. I was anxious in a way I couldn't quite explain. Not worried that something was wrong. Mrs. Chun had been sending me daily updates, photos of Teddy on my couch, assurances that he was eating and seemed okay. But okay wasn't the same as fine. And I knew him well enough to know that my sudden absence would have affected him. Dogs don't understand hospitals. They don't understand accidents or injuries or why the person they depend on simply doesn't come home one day. All they know is that their world has suddenly become unpredictable again. I wondered if he thought I'd abandoned him, if he was pacing my apartment at night the way he used to, searching for something he couldn't find. The thought made my chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with broken ribs. At 1:58 p.m., I heard voices in the hallway. Mrs. Chen's accented English, polite but firm. Yes, I understand. He is very good dog. No trouble. Then the door opened. Mrs. Chun came in first, holding Teddy's leash. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, wearing a puffy jacket despite the heated building. Her eyes found mine immediately. He has been very good, she said. Eating, sleeping, waiting. But I think he misses you very much. Then she stepped aside. Teddy stood in the doorway. For a moment, neither of us moved. He looked the same tan coat, same graying muzzle, same steady build. But something in his posture was different. Tense, uncertain. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw it. Confusion. Maybe hurt. I'm definitely worried. Hey, buddy, I said softly. His ears perked forward. His tail gave one tentative wag. Mrs. Chun unclipped the leash. Go, she said gently. Teddy didn't run. He never ran. But he crossed the room with purpose, moving carefully around the 4-stand and the chair until he was beside my bed. He stopped there, looking up at me. I shifted, trying to sit up more, and winced. The movement pulled at my ribs, sent a sharp jolt through my leg. Teddy's ears flattened. He let out a small, worried sound. Not quite a whine, but close. I'm okay, I told him. I promise. I reached my hand down over the edge of the bed. He sniffed it, one long, thorough investigation, then pressed his nose into my palm. We stayed like that. No dramatic reunion. No jumping or licking or overwhelming excitement. Just contact. Confirmation. You're real. You're here. Mrs. Chun pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down. He has been very worried, she said quietly. The first 2 nights he did not eat. Just sat by your door. I had to sit with him, talk to him, before he could relax. Thank you, I said, my voice thick, for everything, for taking care of him, for bringing him here. She waved her hand dismissively. Of course, he is family. That word, family, hit me harder than I expected. Teddy rested his chin on the edge of the mattress, as close as he could get without climbing up. His eyes never left my face. I stroked his head slowly, carefully. His fur was soft and familiar under my fingers. Grounding. Real. I heard what he did, I said to Mrs. Chun. How he got out. How he found me. She nodded. Very smart dog. How did he know where I was? She shrugged. Some things we cannot explain. Animals know things we do not. My grandmother used to say they can feel our spirit, even far away. She smiled. Maybe it is true. Maybe he just loves you very much. The nurse came back 20 minutes later to check my vitals. She paused when she saw Teddy, clearly preparing to enforce the rules, but then she saw his position. Chin on the bed, absolutely still, eyes on me, and her expression softened. He's very calm, she said, surprised. He's always calm, I replied. She did her work quickly and efficiently, checking monitors, making notes. Teddy tracked her movements but didn't react. When she finished, she paused at the door. 30 minutes, she reminded us. But her tone was gentler than before. After she left, Mrs. Chen stood. I will give you time alone. I will wait outside. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She patted my hand. Some conversations, you need privacy. She slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. The room fell quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital beyond. Footsteps in the hallway, muffled voices, wheels squeaking on linoleum. Teddy and I looked at each other. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm sorry I didn't come home. His tail thumped once against the floor. They told me what you did, how you got out, how you found me. My voice cracked. You saved my life, Teddy. He blinked slowly, still resting against the bed. I tried to keep talking, but the words got stuck. Everything I'd been holding together for the past 5 days. The fear, the pain, the overwhelming awareness of how close I'd come to dying suddenly hit me all at once. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. You weren't supposed to. I couldn't finish. Couldn't articulate what I meant. You weren't supposed to be the one saving me. I was supposed to be the one who saved you. But that wasn't true, was it? We'd saved each other. Over and over. In small ways and large ones. In daily routines and desperate moments. That was what family meant. The tears came then, hot and messy and unstoppable. Not from pain. Not from fear. From gratitude. From understanding. From the overwhelming recognition of what we'd built together. Teddy shifted, trying to get closer. I reached down with both hands, ignoring the pull in my ribs, and wrapped my arms around his neck as much as I could from the bed. He leaned into me, solid and warm and present. Thank you, I whispered into his fur. Thank you for not giving up on me. His tail wagged slowly, steadily. We stayed like that until my tears subsided, until my breathing evened out, until the monitors stopped registering my elevated heart rate. When I finally pulled back, Teddy licked my hand once. Gentle, deliberate. I laughed through the lingering tears. I love you too. Mrs. Chun came back in exactly 30 minutes, right as the nurse returned. Time to go, the nurse said, not unkindly. Mrs. Chun clipped the leash back onto Teddy's collar. He resisted, trying to stay by the bed. "It's okay," I told him. "I'll be home soon. I promise." He looked at me for a long moment, then allowed himself to be led away. At the doorway, he stopped and glanced back one more time. I lifted my hand in a small wave. His tail wagged twice. Then he was gone. I lay back against the pillows, exhausted but lighter somehow. The nurse was still there, adjusting something on the floor. "That's a good dog," she said quietly. "The best," I agreed. "You're lucky." I nodded. "I know, but luck wasn't the right word. What Teddy and I had wasn't luck. It was a choice. It was commitment. It was 5 years of showing up for each other, even when, especially when, it was hard. It was love in its quietest, most enduring form. And it had saved us both. I came home on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the accident. Mrs. Chun had kept my apartment running, watering the plant that somehow still hadn't died, taking out the trash, making sure Teddy's routine stayed as normal as possible. When she helped me through the door, leaning on crutches, every muscle in my body screaming protest, the first thing I saw was Teddy. He was sitting in the middle of the living room, perfectly still, watching the door, waiting. When our eyes met, his tail started wagging, that slow, dignified wag that had become his signature. He stood and walked toward me, careful and deliberate, and pressed his side against my good leg. Not jumping, not overwhelming me, just being there. "Hi," I whispered, reaching down to rest my hand on his head. He leaned into the touch, eyes closing briefly. "We're okay. We're still here." Recovery was slow. Physical therapy twice a week. Pain that woke me at 3 a.m. Simple tasks, showering, cooking, getting dressed, that suddenly required planning and effort. The insurance company called constantly. Medical bills arrived in steady waves. But through all of it, Teddy was there. He adjusted to my new limitations without being asked. Stayed close when I struggled on the crutches. Moved out of the way when I needed space. Positioned himself near my chair during the day, near my bed at night. He'd learned, over 5 years, how to read me. Now he was reading a different version, one that was healing but still fragile, and adapting accordingly. One afternoon, about a month after I came home, I was sitting on the couch with my leg elevated, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The accident, the hospital, the moment I learned what Teddy had done. People kept calling it a miracle. "You're so lucky your dog found you," they'd say. "What are the odds?" But the more I thought about it, the more I realized they were asking the wrong question. It wasn't about odds or luck or coincidence. It was about connection, about attention, about 5 years of learning each other so thoroughly that even distance couldn't break the thread between us. Teddy had known something was wrong before anyone else because he'd spent half a decade studying me, learning my patterns, memorizing the architecture of my life. And when that pattern broke, he'd acted. Not because he was trained, not because he was extraordinary by nature, but because he'd chosen to be. I thought about the shelter, about the day I met him. Everyone had seen a difficult dog, a liability, a lost cause. But what they'd called shut down, I'd recognized as exhaustion. What they'd labeled reactive, I understood as fear. What they'd dismissed as unworthiness, I'd seen as a reflection of my own struggle. We were both broken in ways that made people uncomfortable. Both existing in spaces we didn't quite fit. Both running out of time. The volunteer had said, "He may never be normal." She was right, but normal was never the point. They say dogs don't understand abstract concepts, that they live only in the moment, driven by instinct and conditioning, incapable of the kind of complex thought we reserve for ourselves. But I know better, because Teddy didn't just react that night. He decided. He broke through a gate he'd never tried to open before, navigated 3 blocks of unfamiliar streets in the dark, found me in an intersection he'd never been to, refused to leave even when everything in his traumatized history should have made him run. That wasn't instinct. That was love. Loyalty. The kind of profound understanding that exists between beings who've saved each other in the ways that matter most. People ask me sometimes if I regret adopting him, if it was worth the difficulty, the fear, the years of patient, painstaking work to help him feel safe. I tell them the truth. I didn't adopt Teddy to save him. I adopted him because we were both standing on the same edge, and neither of us could step back alone. What happened after wasn't a rescue. It was survival. Mutual, messy, imperfect survival. We didn't fix each other. We gave each other reasons to keep trying. And over time, those reasons became routines. The routines became stable. And stability became something neither of us thought we'd have again. A future. 6 months after the accident, I was mostly healed. The limp would probably stay, the doctor said. The ribs had mended but would ache when it rained. The scars were permanent. But I was alive. One Saturday morning, I took Teddy to the park, the same one we'd been walking to for years. Took longer now, my pace slower, but he didn't mind. He'd slowed down too. We matched each other. We found our usual bench and sat. Well, I sat. Teddy lay at my feet, head resting on his paws, watching the world with calm, knowing eyes. An elderly woman passed by, walking a small terrier. She smiled at us. "Beautiful dog," she said. "Thank you. How long have you had him?" "Almost 6 years. He looks like a good boy." I reached down and scratched behind Teddy's ears. He leaned into it, eyes half closing. "He's better than good," I said quietly. That night, I pulled out the folder from the shelter again. The intake photo, the liability waivers, the medical records from a dog no one wanted. I looked at that picture, at Teddy's defeated posture, his dull eyes, his resignation, and then I looked across the room where he was curled up on the couch, snoring softly, bathed in lamplight. The transformation was staggering. Not just physical, though that was part of it, but the essence of him, the life in his eyes, the peace in his body. People would look at that photo and see a rescue story, a redemption arc, a happy ending where the broken dog gets saved by the kind human. But that's not what this was. This was 2 lives that recognized each other in their darkest moments and made a choice. We'll hold on, together, not because it was easy, not because we knew it would work, but because the alternative, letting go, giving up, disappearing, was worse than the hard work of staying. I walked over to the couch and sat beside Teddy. He stirred, lifting his head to look at me. 5 years ago, I said quietly, you had hours left to live. They'd given up on you. And I walked into that shelter with nothing to offer but my own brokenness. His tail thumped once against the cushion. I thought I was saving you. I thought that was the story. I rested my hand on his back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. But you saved me too, over and over, in ways I didn't even recognize at the time, in a way I'm still discovering. He shifted closer, resting his head against my leg. You're not my pet, I whispered. You're my family, my partner, the reason I'm still here. We sat like that for a long time. The apartment is quiet around us. The world outside continues its relentless forward motion. But at that moment we were still, grounded, together. They say dogs don't understand sacrifice. They say animals can't comprehend the concept of loyalty in the way humans do. But I know the truth, because once, in a cold shelter kennel, a dog who had every reason to give up chose to trust me instead. And 5 years later, when my life was slipping away on a dark, rain-slicked road, he chose me again, not as an obligation, not as an instinct, as a family. Some lives don't just intersect. They recognize each other. They wait for each other. And when they finally meet, They hold on through the darkness, through the fear, through every reason to let go, until both have found their way back to solid ground. This isn't a rescue story. It's a story about two survivors who became each other's reason to keep surviving. And that, I've learned, is the deepest kind of love there is. Teddy gave up on, labeled broken, told he'd never be enough, but he became everything. And honestly, that's what we're doing here too, building something from nothing, one story at a time, one subscriber at a time. We're so close to 1,000, and if the story moved you even a little bit, help us get there. Hit subscribe, drop a like, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and share the story with someone who needs to hear it. Let's prove that the underdogs, the broken ones, the overlooked ones, can do extraordinary things. Teddy did. So can we.